Hello and welcome back to the Alchemical Arts. Hope everybody's well today. It's ready to get stuck in again to some pigment making. Today's a particularly nice pigment that I have been sort of tinkering at for a little while and had mixed results, and then the other day I thought, let's try something a little bit out there and see if we can get a good result, and it worked. So today I'm going to show you the process as to how I ended up achieving Manganese Violet. So Manganese Violet is a manganese pyrophosphate pigment. So it's basically a combination of the manganese ion and a phosphate ion to create this very, very nice, rich purple violet colored pigment, which I believe is considered to be pretty much completely non-toxic. Now, I'm always a little bit wary of pigments nonetheless, and I'm not entirely sure if there are unreacted compounds still in the pigment, and so maybe I wouldn't consider this completely non-toxic, but supposedly it is a safe non-toxic pigment that is used often in, I think, eyeshadow and various makeups, but it's a really beautiful, rich violet purple color, and it's surprisingly easy to make. Well, at least I figured out a particularly easy process to make it. So we're going to go through that process today. So basically, what we're looking to do here is start with the source of manganese. So for that, we've got ourselves manganese dioxide, which is probably one of the most common forms that you'll find manganese come in. It's used in batteries, I believe, and numerous other applications. I get this for ceramic supplies because it's easy and cheap to buy from ceramic supply places, because I believe it's used in glazing. The next thing that we're going to need is our phosphate sources. So because we're trying to create that union between manganese and phosphate, we need a few different phosphate sources. So we have here monoammonium phosphate, which is often referred to as MAP, M-A-P. That's just a ammonia phosphate salt. I'm not entirely sure the applications. It might be used in fertilizer, maybe some sort of I think it's used in aquascaping or something like that, like terrarium or aquarium based fertilizer stuff. And then lastly, we've got phosphoric acid. So we have an 85% concentration of phosphoric acid here, which is the glacial concentration of phosphoric acid. And this is a mild acid that's used often as a sanitizer in brewing. So if you're doing wine making or beer making, you would probably come across phosphoric acid as a sort of food safe or food grade sanitizer. So traditionally, and there are other videos on making manganese violet you'll find here on YouTube, people do what they call, I think it's like an acid reflux reaction, where you're using the phosphoric acid to sort of aid in a heated acidic reaction to, break down the manganese dioxide so that it will form with the phosphate ions from the ammonia phosphate, and the phosphoric acid will just add more phosphate. Now as I've said many times on the channel, I'm not a major chemistry expert in the details of things, more just in the practicality of application and making it work. So the exact science behind what's going on here, I'm not entirely sure. So normally what people do is they mix the reagents together and they put it in a beaker with a stir bar and put that into an oil bath and heat it up to about 130 degrees and stir it for about an hour or so, and then they ramp the temperature up to about 230 degrees, and that should really get the reaction cooking, so to speak. And after a couple more hours, everything should have converted to manganese phosphate or pyrophosphate, and you'll have your purple pigment, but it'll be kind of like a goopy candy, and you boil that in water and then you get your final pigment after that. That hasn't worked for me in the past when I've done it. It's probably because my hot plate sucks and can't get up to temperature enough, And so because I'm failing to get up to temperature, I'm failing to get the reaction to happen properly, I'm still getting lots of manganese dioxide unreacted. And manganese dioxide is a really kind of deep black browny kind of colour. It's what you find in your burnt umbers. Gives it that really sort of deep chocolatey dark blacky brown kind of quality to ochres. And so any amount of that in our purple pigment will just ruin it. It will just make it look like crap basically, and it won't work, and you won't get that nice clean purple colour. So my solution was to actually take the mixture, so mix everything up with the phosphoric acid and the monoammonium phosphate and the manganese dioxide, mix that all up, place that in a metal container or a glass container, and actually take that out to the kiln, set the kiln to 230 degrees and just leave it for like 3 or 4 hours. I found a research paper that was doing this sort of reaction where they were basically heating in a furnace the reactants rather than worrying about constant stirring in a beaker. And I found that by leaving it in the kiln, it sort of bubbles away and reacts and expands, and a little bit of it poured over the side and sits there for a few hours. And after a few hours, we're left with sort of a mixture of like hard, kind of fused, porous bits of the pigment and still some goopy stuff left as well. And then by boiling that with water, I managed to get a successful result. So let's go through and I'll show you the measurements, I'll show you the process, and we'll make some manganese violet. Alright, so first thing, we're going to weigh out our ingredients and we're going to pop them into this beaker. I'm going to try something here that I hopefully you won't regret, which is I'm going to try and actually react the entire process in this beaker in the kiln. Because I'm only going to be heating the kiln up to about 230 degrees, the glass that the beaker is made from should be able to handle this perfectly fine, especially if the kiln starts cold and gradually heats up with the glass. So if the glass isn't getting temperature shocked, it should be totally fine to withstand that. And that way, if the reaction takes place inside the beaker here, and hopefully doesn't flow up over the top, then what can happen is I can then, once the reaction is finished after a few hours, bring this inside, pour boiling water into it, and then just put this on the hot plate and boil the entire thing inside this beaker, thus breaking down the pigment and being able to collect the pigment easier without having to transfer from whatever I end up using in the kiln into a beaker and boiling it, and you'll have loss and all this sticky stuff to work with. So let's give it a go. Worst case scenario, the beaker breaks, the whole thing goes to crap, and I end up with a ton of manganese dioxide all over the bottom of the kiln. That's the worst case. Best case scenario, it works perfectly well and I've got a convenient solution. So there's no risk without reward. That's the wrong way of saying that. There's no reward without risk. So let's give it a go. So first off, we're going to measure out 70 grams of monoammonium phosphate that I have here. So let's start measuring that out. In fact, let's just pour from this bag here into this little ceramic crucible here. That's 60. There we go, 70 grams there. So we'll chuck our 70 grams into our beaker here. I'm going to grab a mask for the next bit because I don't like the manganese dioxide dust. So now we don't need that much manganese dioxide, so we actually only need 17.2 grams of manganese dioxide. So we'll measure that out into our container here. we want our manganese dioxide to be on the lower end of the thing, because we want our phosphates to be in excess so that they can make sure that they break down all of our manganese dioxide. We don't want any of that left in our final product, otherwise it will ruin the color. As I said before, you can see there, it's such a black, dark chemical. So I'm just going to mix this dry to begin with in this beaker here. Mostly just wanting to get everything roughly combined and broken up so there's no big chunks of the monoammonium phosphate. I want to coat everything in the manganese dioxide. I have seen in the other syntheses that people do on YouTube, they grind this in a mortar and pestle, but given the fact that everything melts down, I don't see the purpose in grinding it all up when it's going to melt into a sort of big liquid. So the last thing we need is phosphoric acid. Now, phosphoric acid is not a super strong acid. It's no like hydrochloric or sulfuric acid, but it can be irritating, and I think it's still worth putting some gloves on for this process. Especially because this phosphoric acid that we're using is glacial, so it's at 85% phosphoric acid, which makes it quite a strong phosphoric acid. And all we need is 12 mils of that. So we have a measuring flask here, and we're going to go and measure out 12 mils, but I'm actually going to go again in slight excess, and I'm actually going to go up to 15 mils, just because I want that little bit of excessive amount of phosphoric acid to make sure that all of the manganese dioxide is reacted. And it won't matter if there's a little excess of phosphoric acid left at the end, because what we're going to be able to do is, because we're boiling the pigment, we'll wash out any excessive unreacted phosphoric acid. So all I'm going to do now is just give this a bit of a stir. It's going to make kind of a thick paste in here. It won't be quite a slurry, but it'll just be a thick paste, and I just want to make sure that all of the dry materials are moistened by the acid, because that's just going to make that process a lot simpler once we get this into the kiln. Here you can see the paste. As you can see, it's just like a thick, sort of sandy paste. And all we're going to do now is take this out to the kiln. So here we are down at the kiln. As you can see, I've set it to 230 degrees. It's currently 8 degrees. We've got our beaker. We're going to place our beaker on the shelf in here. And then we're going to close everything up. We're going to let that heat up now. And we'll be back in an hour or so to check on it. And we'll see what happens from there. So here we are at the kiln, and as you can see, we're at 234 degrees. So I'm going to just open it up just to give you a bit of a view of what's going on in there. So you can see there, the mixture has bubbled up, and you can see some bubbling going on there. It's sort of this goopy, like, it's almost like a caramel sugar candy melt, and it's just slowly sort of bubbling away there. So I'm going to let that go for, again, a couple more hours, and yeah, it's quite interesting. It's already, you can sort of see a purple tinge happening to it. So we'll come back in a little while. Alright, we're back at about the 2 hour mark. As you can see, the temperature is a stable 232 degrees. Let's open up and have a look at what we got. So, You can see there that it's obviously boiled up for a little bit, but everything looks quite purple. And I think we're probably at the point where we can call this done. I think it's probably been about 2.5 hours. So I'm just going to gently lift this out of the kiln, and we're going to place it up on top there. As you can see, very purpley. I'm just going to let that sit for a while to cool down before we bring it inside. And I really don't want to crack the beaker at this point. So we'll let that just sit for a little while, and then we'll bring it inside. Okay, so here we are with our beaker, which has cooled down. As you can see, we've got this sort of purpley, dark purpley group at the back, and on the sides here you can see this very strong purple color has formed. So all I'm going to do now is gently start pouring some boiling water in. Let's see if we can dissolve that stuff off the sides. You can see there some of it's coming off. Like so. And I'm just going to fill this all the way up above the level there. And as you can already see, there's a brilliantly purple liquid has formed. I'm just going to give this a bit of a stir. Oh, I can feel at the bottom. There we go. You can see there. Let's just move this so I can give you a good look at this without it dripping. It's like a weird kind of stringy. Oh, I can feel it at the bottom there. It's like a goopy purple candy, like melted sugar. So all I'm going to do is we're going to get this back up on the hot plate here. And I'm just going to keep stirring this until all the stuff stuck at the bottom comes unstuck. I'm going to put the heating on as well because we're going to boil this, I think. Really want to dissolve everything into solution. It seems to want to dissolve fairly easily despite being so firm, and I think the heat will help it. This may take a little while, I think, for it to properly dissolve down. But it will get there, I reckon. So I'm glad the method of the beaker worked. At some point I'll try and see if I can get a stir bar in here. But I think for now we just need to sit it on here and boil it for a while to loosen up everything that's sort of stuck to the bottom there. So I might just let this sit for a bit, and once it gets nice and hot and dissolved, we will we'll filter it off, hopefully, and collect our pigment. But otherwise, so far a success. After boiling for a while, I've turned off the stirring and let everything settle down, and you can see there we've got the pigment at the bottom, and we've got this sort of purpley pink liquid on top. So what this is, I believe this is some sort of permanganate. So there'll be a reaction byproduct of the manganese, and I know that manganese, when it forms different types of molecules, it's called a permanganate, which I think is like an MO4. So you have potassium permanganate, which is a very purple colored liquid. Well, solid, but when you put it in water it becomes a very purple colored liquid. So I think that's what's formed here. So what I'm going to do is just very carefully decant some of this excess liquid off. Probably just leave it right there. You can see it there, sort of this pink clear liquid. You don't need that. And then bring in good old vacuum filter pump, and we're just going to do a vacuum filtration, collect the pigment, I'll dry it, and then I'll show you the dried pigment once it's done. So now that we've finished filtering, washing and drying our manganese, here's the pigment still on the filter paper, just come out of the dehydrator. It's beautifully soft, which is really nice. It's going to make sieving it down to final particle size particularly easy. It's a very, very super fine soft powder, and as you can see, it's just such a stunning, rich, beautiful purple. I'm really happy with how this turned out. That method of putting it into the kiln and heating it at 230 degrees seemed to work perfectly fine. And was actually quite a breeze to do the next step of just adding the hot water and boiling in the same beaker. And this is our final result. So I'm going to clean this up in terms of just get it into a jar, get it nicely softly powdered, and then let's have a look at it in some mediums. But otherwise, really good result. Alright, so let's make up some of this Manganese Violet into a watercolor, because I think it'll make a really nice watercolor. Plus, I've read that the pigment is actually quite transparent, so it'll be really interesting to see the transparency level. So we're just going to add a little bit of a basic watercolor binder, probably about that much there, and we'll start to get this mixed up. Oh, we might need a little bit more binder than that. Such a nice colour, such a rich purple, and given that the pigment is already so soft, I haven't had to do any major grinding or anything for this to just get to the softness level that it needs to be. It really wants to absorb the binder though. That's quite interesting. We're going to need a tiny bit more binder, I think. Because this is quite thick. There we go. That's looking pretty good now. This paint off of the spatula. Get our mooler in, do a little bit of grinding. A little bit of grittiness, but for the most part, it's pretty smooth. I haven't put a rubber mat under my grinding plate, so it's just going all over the place with the resistance. Alright, so I've finished making it up as a watercolor. Let's just get a little bit over here, get some water on it, and really it is such a good, oh look at that, such a rich, beautiful purple color. Really nice granulation too. I think because the manganese is kind of heavy, it's going to sink into the fibers of the paper. You get the really classic metal oxide sort of granulating patterns. Strong colour too. Really nice and strong. Look at that. It's really good. I really like that. And sort of dilutes out to this nice sort of gentle purplish colour. That's definitely a winner and very simple and easy to make. Makes for a good watercolour too. Look at that, like nice sort of stipply granulating pattern. That's really cool working properties. This definitely makes for a good watercolour. If you get really strong stuff and dip it in there. Really cool effects. I really like that. Cool. That brings us to the end of that episode. I hope you really enjoyed the process of learning to make the Manganese Violet. I certainly enjoyed making it, and I'm really happy that it sort of turned out to be a fairly straightforward process, especially after I'd had those sort of failures and trial and error moments probably about a year ago when I first attempted to make this. So to have everything sort of run really smoothly is always really nice, especially when you kind of go away and you research, you figure out a plan, and then you go to enact the plan and it actually works and you're like, brilliant. So now I have a good method for making Manganese Violet, and if you have the right kind of setup at home, you could give this a go. I wouldn't recommend doing this in like a home oven or anything, but if you've got something outside that you can work with, can get a steady 230 degrees, this is a simple process and it's fun and the results are stunning. If you like the look of this pigment and want to actually pick up some of the pigment yourself, I'm currently selling all of the pigments that I've made here on the channel, plus others that I make as well. If you just follow the link in this video description, you'll find a link to the Alchemical Arts store where I have the full range of pigments that I'm currently making at the moment. It's been really nice. I've got a really good response from getting them out in the world, and that was the whole intention of heading down this line, was eventually getting to the point where I can get the pigments into hands of artists so they can start using them and play with them and do stuff, and I can see some fascinating results because I really want to see my colours get out there, because it's a really enjoyable process making them, and I'm really keen to see what people can do with them. Anyway, thanks for tuning in for this. I've already actually filmed the next episode and we'll be editing that out and getting that out soon, so that's exciting, and I've started some bigger, more exciting projects, so stay tuned. The next couple of months should be interesting. Thank you, and stay safe out there, and see you next time.